Hello and welcome to More Than Words, a podcast about exploring Britain's furthest flung places and documenting the slow, inexorable collapse of my knee joints. I'm your host, and before we go any further, I need to address something. Yes, this podcast is named after a 90s power ballad by Extreme. Now, if you're under 30 and confused, ask someone with a landline or who's rewound a cassette with a pencil. Then maybe ask them what a cassette is. Before we get started, a quick note about numbering. I'm calling this episode 0 as it's really just an introduction. And from here on, I'll be using episode and stage interchangeably for the rest of this whole debacle because, well, you'll see why shortly. Right, now that's sorted, let me tell you what this is all about. I'm attempting a virtual journey across Britain, 2,884 kilometres of it to be precise, visiting every extreme point. The highest, the lowest, and the most northern, southern, eastern and western settlements this soggy island has to offer. And I'm going to tell you about them. The places I mean, not my knees. Well, mostly not my knees. It's part fitness challenge, part cultural exploration, but mostly an excuse to write about obscure trivia, failed resolutions, and the joys of Excel conditional formatting. Expect puns, ghosts, and really terrible place name pronunciations. But before we get into any of that, we need to talk about why I'm doing this in the first place. Which means we need to talk about New Year's resolutions. And trust me, I hate them as much as you do. Resolutions. A brief history of failure. Now let's be honest. New Year's resolutions are basically an annual ritual where we lie to ourselves harder than the contestants on The Apprentice writing their CVs for the interview round. Think about it. You spend an entire month binge eating, binge drinking and binge watching everything under the sun while the world sparkles with twinkly lights. Then you immediately go cold turkey on absolutely everything all at once just because both the day and the month happen to consist purely of the number 1. Brilliant. What could possibly go wrong? And this seems especially daft when you consider that those dates only started to mean anything when Pope Gregory XIII, and I think he was arguably overstepping his remit here, decided to drop his own calendar back in 1582. And it wasn't even the helpful type of calendar you can stick on the fridge to remind you of your next dentist appointment or when the dog needs worming. No, this was the papal variety, which I like to imagine featured Gregory himself each month. January in a silk cassock number, February casually reclining in a 16th century Popemobile. You get the idea. But here's the thing. Not only does bouncing from one to another seem a bit self-flagellating, psychology today suggests that New Year's resolutions can actually make people feel unnecessarily stressed out and disappointed in themselves. In fact, a US study shows that 80% of New Year's resolutions fail by February. 80%! Although, to be fair, this is the same nation that elected Donald Trump to its highest office. Twice. So self-flagellation is practically a national sport over there. The other 20% who claim to stick with their resolutions? They're probably the ones who still consider paying for their gym memberships to be virtuous enough, even though they gave up going a fortnight into January after sweating more during their first spin class than the bloke wearing the red shirt on a Star Trek away mission. For the uninitiated here, the red shirts always die. This is the first of many cultural references which will undoubtedly mean nothing to a lot of people, but it's my podcast and I'll confuse if I want to. Now, to be fair to our American friends, we've all been desperately failing at this stuff for over 4,000 years, as New Year's resolutions are believed to date back to the ancient Babylonians. At the start of their year, they'd commit to the gods that they would settle their debts and return any objects they'd borrowed. The usual stuff, I guess, stepladders, strimmers, lawnmowers, which is clearly why the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were always so well maintained. Oh, and by the way, the Babylonians started their new year in March, which definitely feels like an easier time to be thinking about self-improvement than in January, just after you've eaten your own body weight in Terry's chocolate or insectations. Control, Alt, retire. Anyway, now that I've made it abundantly clear I'm no fan of New Year's resolutions and have, I think you will agree, conclusively proven them to be Gregorian nonsense, it's time to set the scene for what this whole escapade is actually about. Namely, what I'm calling, definitely not a New Year's resolution but sort of a mid-year / post-middle age crisis disguised as a challenge. Catchy, right? At the time I put this episode together, it was July the 1st, 2025, slap bang in the middle of the now widely accepted Gregorian interpretation of the year. More significantly, for me anyway, it also marked 1 week into retirement after 36 years of drawing a salary for what was essentially performance art, pretending I knew about IT. So, I decided to do 2 things. 1. Set myself some new fitness challenges to shed some accumulated timber. I'm going for enough to make a small IKEA bedside table. And 2. Not wait until I turn over the first page of my 2026 Take That calendar to actually make a start. Now, before anyone pipes up with the challenges are just resolutions in disguise, let's get pedantic for a moment. A resolution, according to one of the many available internet dictionaries, is a promise to yourself to do or not do something. A challenge, on the other hand, is described as something that needs great mental or physical effort in order to be done successfully and therefore tests a person's ability. Crucially, challenges are often numerically based, which means spreadsheets, yay! And to someone like me, that's like crack, but with pivot tables, conditional formatting, and the euphoric high of getting your VLOOKUP to work first time, rather than, glass pipes, long-term respiratory damage, and rapid onset paranoia. Built by Dad, powered by Excel. Challenges also typically involve some sort of quantifiable target, and I thrive on numbers. If I have a goal I'm even vaguely interested in and it can be measured, I am compelled, almost psychotically, to try and achieve it, or better it. My dad is entirely to blame for this behaviour, by the way. As an aside, he also gifted me the compulsive organising gene and the uncontrollable urge to always fiddle with any object on a table. But mostly, he never let me win anything as a child. Not kickabouts in the park, not Monopoly, not even who can hold their breath longest while walking past the sewage works. Okay, I'm kidding about that last one, obviously. He'd only have attempted it if there was a leaderboard involved. When I finally did beat him at something, squash, age 14, Potter's Leisure Resort in Norfolk, it felt like I'd bagged Olympic gold. He responded by organising a post-match drug test. I passed, but the celebrations were somewhat dampened by his lingering suspicions. It's fair to say that all this has shaped me into the man I am today. Overly competitive, target chasing, and frankly unbearable to play Monopoly with. And I do thank him for that, genuinely. I'm glad I was raised to understand the value of striving, of winning and losing, and knowing the worth of both. Anyway, that's quite enough life lessons for one episode. If we're not careful, we'll be veering towards becoming a self-improvement podcast, and nobody wants that. Besides, he still can't beat me at squash, and he's only 80 now. Lightweight. Because apparently I didn't learn the first time. But I digress. And just to warn you, I do that a lot. Ronnie Corbett, this one's for you. So what am I actually doing and why? Ask no one, ever. Well, imaginary listener who definitely won't be listening to this, back in the calm and pleasant waters of 2013, I completed a challenge of running, walking or cycling at least 5 kilometres a day for 100 consecutive days. Yes, I was quite impressed with myself too, thanks. I also shifted a few pounds of lard and raised a couple of quid for charity into the bargain, which was nice. A couple of years later, I tried something longer, a 2,500 kilometre virtual trek around the UK, logging real kilometres and writing about the bizarre and occasionally brilliant places I'd visit along the way. I did it for a bit and then gave up. Why? Well, work got in the way a bit and it was a New Year's resolution, which obviously meant it was doomed from the start. And look at that, I'm already doing callbacks. What a pro. Anyway, 10 years later and considerably less wise but infinitely more retired, I'm giving it another go. Similar idea, slightly tweaked route. And this time if I fail, I can't blame being in full-time employment. And let's face it, what else have I got to do as a retiree? Apart from clogging up the GP surgery and loitering in the post office queue at precisely the time working people need to be there. So here it is, my 2025 mid-year challenge, TM. Part A. For every kilometre I walk, run, cycle or otherwise self-propel in real life, I'll move 1 kilometre further along a 2,884 kilometre virtual route. The target? Cover the whole distance within the next 12 months. Part B? Write and talk about it. Not tedious gymfluencer updates, thank God, but what I'd actually see if I was out there doing it for real. With puns, possibly ghosts and almost certainly regret. What would Ben Franklin do? Probably not this. Now, the thing about podcasting, even if the only people who will ever hear your output are you and your mum, is that it's probably good practice to talk about things that aren't incredibly boring. Benjamin Franklin supposedly wrote, either write something worth reading or do something worth writing. If he were around today, I think he'd put it like this. Either make a podcast worth binging, or at least one that distracts people from how much they hate the treadmill. Which is easy enough when you've invented bifocals, harnessed electricity, founded a nation, and still managed to get your face on a $100 bill. The rest of us, we're just trying to keep a houseplant alive. Still, he had a point. So here's the deal. The kilometres matter, of course, and I'll share a little each episode about how my legs, lungs, and general sense of dignity are coping. But really, this is about wandering through the gloriously peculiar geography and trivia of Britain, the land of tea, queuing, and quite existential dread. Some stops will be iconic, some will be barely on the map, and a few will sound like they were named by someone 6 Jaeger bombs deep in a Wetherspoons. At the very least, I hope it'll be more enlightening than your average TikTok travelogue. You know, some bloke in a gilet trudging through Whitby while pointing at floating text bubbles. The Long March of the Mildly Motivated. So, buckle up everyone, by which I mean mum. My episodic ramblings are going to chart a virtual 2,884 kilometre journey, part aerobic challenge, part geographical odyssey, as I attempt to visit every extreme settlement in the UK. I'll start in Score, Shetland's northernmost village, and wind my way down to St Agnes in the Isles of Scilly, the southernmost. On the way, I'll swing by Beleek in County Fermanagh, the westernmost point, Lowestoft in the east, Ben Nevis at the top, literally, and Holmfen at the bottom. I'll throw in John O'Groats and Land's End for good measure, because why not? And taking a slightly suboptimal route, avoiding motorways because nothing says exploring Britain like crawling behind a tractor in Devon for an hour wondering if time has any meaning anymore, gives us the magic number 2,884 kilometres. That means I have to cover 55.5 kilometres a week, both virtually and in real life, or 7.9 kilometres a day. In old money, that's about 5 miles every day, which is quite a lot for someone who's recently started making involuntary noises when getting out of chairs. Disclaimers and digressions. Some final thoughts then. Apologies in advance for the content, the digressions, the terrible puns, and the fact this entire project may well be the auditory equivalent of shouting into a well while wearing a Fitbit. But if you learned something, or even just zone out enough to forget the treadmill beneath you, I'll take that as a win. And if not, well, thanks for hanging on this long. It means you're either very kind, desperate for background noise, or genetically obliged. Oh, and one more thing. Most of what follows is cobbled together from internet rabbit holes and the fever dreams of various AI tools. So if anything's slightly inaccurate, wildly misleading, or complete cobblers, sorry. But you were warned. Next time, we kick off from Score in Shetland, the UK's northernmost village. We'll find out what's actually there, spoiler, probably sheep, what stories unfold on the 35-mile journey south, and whether my knees are finally committed to becoming a percussion section. Until then, stretch your legs, take a few steps, and remember, once there's a spreadsheet involved, it's not a resolution, it's project management. This has been More Than Words. Thanks for listening, and see you for episode 1 soon.